Cool, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Thanks a lot for coming to my talk today to talk about crafting beautiful video frames and in particular to talk about programmatic video, which is a bit of a foreign concept. So I'll walk you through what programmatic video is, the kind of things you can create with it, and how to really get fancy and make things look beautiful so that people want to watch your videos. Bit of background about myself and how I ended up in this fairly unique niche. As a web developer, I was just following my own interests, and I had an idea to build an app where people could upvote on gameplay clips that people were uploading to this platform, so that people could kind of swipe left, swipe right, what they thought was good and what wasn't good. And then at the end of each month, the platform would be able to check the database for what was most upvoted, concatenate them all, and have like a monthly highlight reel for the community. I didn't actually end up finishing that app, but when I started building it, I kind of just assumed that there was technology out there that would allow me to programmatically stitch videos together based on some kind of database call. And I was subscribed to the Product Hunt newsletter at the time, and it would have been week 1 or week 2 of starting this project that I think it was the product of the day came up. It was called Remotion. I think it was version 2 of Remotion that was being launched, and luckily for me, it fit my needs perfectly. It was a framework that sat on top of React, which is the front end that I'm most familiar with. So I started using Remotion, got involved in the Discord server, asking a lot of questions. Then as my own skills grew, I was able to answer a lot of questions, and had a chat to Johnny and Mehmet, the founders of Remotion, asked if they would like me to moderate the Discord. And then I just started helping out more and more and making more of a name for myself within Remotion. And I was working full-time at the time, and people started to send me messages. Companies would send me messages asking if I could freelance to help them out with their Remotion solutions. And I think it's 3 years ago now that I left full-time work to start freelancing or consulting, and now I've got my own business called M9Y, where I do programmatic video solutions across a range of industries. And I set up cloud rendering pipelines, and I also build out front-end video editing UIs. And I've also worked with the Remotion team themselves, contributing to the code base, and I built a cloud rendering pipeline on GCP that anyone can deploy themselves. And if you go to the GitHub, based on the number of commits that I've made, I'm number 3 top contributor to Remotion. So what is programmatic video, and what are some examples of programmatic video that you might see in your life? If you're watching sport, which is, I guess, we're at the sports stadium today, so when people are watching this, the game at home on their TV, if it's AFL, you might see in the bottom right corner like the score for the game. You might see some colours behind the team names that are based on, the team. And occasionally the score will expand and it will show like points and goals and then the final score. And then at halftime, it might expand out and be the full screen and show like some kind of cool picture of a player, their movements around the field, some statistics on their possessions and things like that. But all of that can be automated so that you've got an algorithm that is looking at that data and it's checking for when thresholds are met and saying that, when you do the halftime talk or halftime break, these are the top 3 players based on these possessions, and therefore it'd be worth, you can use that input to have your video at halftime. Another example is, sorry, I should have stopped my screen from going to sleep. Another example is the weather reporting each night when someone's standing in front of the state of WA, and it's looking at all the different locations. That'll be an API hitting the Bureau of Meteorology. I mean, I'm making some assumptions here, but I'm sure it's true enough. Hit the API, get the weather data. Based on that, the different icons are displayed. We've got latitude and longitude as the person's talking, and it's zooming in on those locations. They won't be like custom animations each time. They'll just be an automation that's set up ahead of time so that it will zoom into these locations based on certain thresholds that are being met. And I think the most prevalent example of programmatic video that you would see today is captions in videos. So using something like Whisper, you can transcribe a video, you can get time-stamped subtitles, and then as you're watching the video, based on that timestamp, it'll be determining what captions to display and highlighting the words that are currently being spoken. So I thought I'd include a little example here of something that's a little bit more fun. So this is a video I made for LinkedIn, really. So it's able to, I just record myself and kind of these videos just come out. There's all the captions, there's some nice visual effects. But I also, actually I'll just let the video play and you'll see. It's not good to say at the start of the video just because of the way the captions are handled, so that's something I need to work with. But in general, it's working really well. And yeah, if you want access to, so that was, I've got like a file in my code that has an array of like swear words and things that I shouldn't say on LinkedIn. And so then as I'm talking, it'll automatically do this visual effect. It'll play the sound over the top. It'll mute my audio. And all of that's just hands off. So, hopefully that means that I'm producing more content because there's not so much burden to actually produce this in the first place. So you'll notice that every now and then I'm pressing spacebar and pausing these slides. So this here is actually a Remotion project. This is the studio, and it uses a Remotion component called the player. And the frames that we're viewing at the moment are, they're being generated not being generated, but they're being displayed on the fly. This is not actually an MP4. This is programmatically saying this is what should happen on each of these frames. So we can see the current frame number. We can see that this slide goes for 60 frames and it's displaying at 30 frames per second. So a little bit of mental maths, you know that this slide goes for 2 seconds. And let's have this box at the bottom. We can set a position for it to be displayed at for frame 0, and we can set a position for it to be displayed at frame 40. So we can change these values here. Let's say that we want it to start at position 100, and we want it to end at position 420. Now, if we want to make a really nice animation, like I was talking before about the AFL scores, where things are expanding out, and it's got some nice flair to it, you would need to say at position, at frame 1, I want it to be at position 101 or whatever it is. At frame 2, I want it to be positioned at 102, and we want to have all those individual positions. At the moment, all we've defined is the positions at frame 0 and frame 40. So what Remotion helps you to do is it has these helper functions so that you can interpolate those values between frame 0 and between frame 40. So if we turn interpolation on for this, you can see that now we've got some really nice motion. And what programmatic video helps you to, it kind of changes the way you think about animations, where you're really thinking about individual frames being created, and it's, I guess you're creating the illusion of motion. When you convert all this to an MP4, you're taking all these screenshots, stitching it all together, wrapping that into the MP4 container, and you call it a video, but it's really just frames being displayed at a certain frame rate. And when you use Remotion, because it sits on top of React, every frame is, you could think of it like every frame is a web page, and everything that's positioned in that frame is done so with CSS. And then when we're telling things to move around the page, we're manipulating those. We're manipulating the CSS values. But CSS is really good for building websites, and generally speaking, websites are a bunch of rectangles. We can round the corners to make them look like circles, but we're quite limited on how awesome we can make things look. And in my opinion, design is a really important part of building apps and products and putting things out into the world. When you make something look awesome and really well thought out with your design, you're signaling to the user that when you were building your product, you really cared about what you were building. And most of the time, you're saying to that user, can you pay me some money to use my product? And what the user needs to feel is that that care has been put into the design. So probably that care has also been put into the database design. Probably that care has also been put into the security practices when they were building this. If you keep your design, if you keep everything just squares, you don't round any corners, you don't do any easing on your animations, I think you're going to limit the amount of people that trust you to use their wallet when they're on your app. So we already know that Remotion is a little, well, Remotion itself is not limited in design. Maybe the web platform is a little limited in design, but there's a really useful component in HTML called the canvas. The canvas element is there to paint things that are outside of this constraint. And so I like to use this tool called Rive. Rive makes it very easy to create these, or perhaps not easy, but it makes it possible to create these really, really fancy animations. Like this one here is a Rive animation. Rive has a runtime, a JavaScript runtime that will paint to a canvas element in your HTML. And so what I do when I'm building these things is I'm using Rive to draw vector animations. I use the JavaScript runtime to paint that animation into a canvas element, and then I use Remotion over top to tell the Rive animation what frame to display at, and then I render that all out to an MP4. And that way I can have programmatic video that has really, really nice design. So I thought I'd include an example here of just a really fancy Rive animation to show you how cool it is as a product. Because one of the use cases, the niche use cases that Rive is pushing for is a heads-up display in a first-person shooter game, or any game really, but first-person shooters easy to understand. So we can see here that there is that the player has some ammo, some kind of frag grenade or something. There's a timer at the top for some boss fight. There's a map down in the corner here that's got some live data of where some enemies are on the map, most likely. So there's the game engine that's kind of computing all this data on what's happening in the game. But then there is the Rive overlay that is displaying this data. The cool thing with Rive also is that it's interactive. So this runtime is not just displaying data, it can also be tracking mouse movements, and it can respond to user input as well. So this Rive animation is running live on my computer at the moment. So if I click on it, you can see that I can fire this gun. And I mean, this is not a real game, this is just like an animation, but yeah, you can see that when I'm clicking that, it has this like really cool animation. The ammo went down, so that would be the game engine detecting the clicks and determining what the ammo is. And all Rive is doing is just like this visual layer on top that's displaying the ammo level. And so I mentioned before that I'm really familiar with the JavaScript runtime for Rive, but you might have been thinking, how are we going to build a first-person shooter with JavaScript? There's also runtimes for Unreal and Unity, and then there's also the Apple, Flutter, React Native, Android, so you can get some really nice animations into your app as well. But that kind of, Rive is something I use with programmatic video, but it's not the focus of today's talk. So what I do with my consultancy is deliver programmatic video solutions, but really it's taken me all this talk just to even explain to you what programmatic video is. So it's really hard for me to go out to a potential customer or identify a potential customer that would use programmatic video. So instead of talking about programmatic video when I'm trying to make a sale, I talk about these wrapped campaigns that have been popularized by the likes of Spotify. So for anyone that's not familiar, at the end of the year, at the end of every calendar year, I should say, Spotify gives everyone a notification saying that for this year, your 2025 Wrapped is ready. You open up the app, and it has this really cool interactive animation. They're actually using Rive this year to build theirs. And you can click through and it will show highlights for your data. It'll say you're the top 1% listener for Taylor Swift. You like to listen to this genre of music in the morning. And it really highlights how you are a unique human and how unique you are compared to the rest of the user base. And people love this. People will take screenshots, click the shareable images, post it to social media. And what you'll see every year, at the end of the year, if you look at the App Store rankings, is that Spotify actually climbs the App Store rankings just because the amount of FOMO and people logging in and trying to get their Wrapped for the year. So these kind of marketing campaigns have real business value. And so for my consultancy, I look for B2C apps that would have user data that people would want to share, and then I offer to make them wrapped campaigns. So this one here is one that I built for a company called Gladiator Tennis, which sets up, in America, it sets up these local seasons and championships and somehow organizes for people to come and meet at courts, play their games. When they finish their game, they put some data into the app, and then at the end of the year, they've got this this pretty cool little animation. There's a really nice one at the end here. That's pretty cool. Yeah. So and then right at the end is this shareable image where if you click share on that, it'll. I mean, it's all just using JavaScript. It'll like take a screenshot of that canvas element and export it as a PNG so that people can then share that to social media. So, actually, what's the next slide? I'll talk a bit more about wrapped campaigns in a bit. I'll focus on the coding for now. So here we go, some live coding. But don't be too scared. All I'm doing is commenting out a Boolean occasionally. So this here is the JavaScript runtime, one of the JavaScript runtimes for Rive called Canvas Advanced. There are higher level runtimes, like there's a React wrapper where you kind of just say like, here's the Rive file, just run. But I don't want my Rive animations just to run. I want to get control of that rendering loop. I want to tell the rendering loop to go to certain frames because at the end of the day, I'm going to be plugging this into a motion where it's going to be screenshotting frames one after another. So I can't have the animation just constantly like running away from me. So if we look at this logic here, the render frame logic, a lot of this is just taken from the documentation, so it's not too complicated. The way that it works is as it calls render frame on the initial run through, and then within render frame, the final step is that it calls itself again. So this is the rendering loop. It's like render a frame, and then render another frame, and then render another frame. And it's advancing every time that it runs through this render frame loop, it's advancing by a certain number of seconds. And the seconds in this instance is 0.01. So if we change that to 0.05, we can now see that the animation slows down by half. And if we halve that again, we can see that the animation goes slower again. But as I said, I don't want my animation just to continue to run. I want to be able to pause it, take a screenshot, and then advance by a certain number of frames. So if we turn this to false, we can now look at the logic and see that the animation is paused. So how is this working? First of all, in Remotion, I like to deal with everything in frames, as opposed to Rive, where they deal with everything in seconds. I won't go into the details on that, but just be careful about rounding numbers, I would say. So if we set this frame that we want to view as frame 64, and we know that we want to render this animation out at 30 frames per second, we can then work out what is that target frame as seconds, where we just say frames divided by frames per second. We end up with seconds. And then we also check in the animation, we say, what are you currently at? What time are you currently at? So maybe it's at 5 seconds, but we want to go to 6 seconds. Well, then the delta is just going to be the difference between those two values. So now we know that when it loops through here, it's advancing by that 1 second. And then when it's looping through again, these will be equal, so it's advancing by 0 seconds. And if we change this here to frame 65, we now see that it's advanced by 1 more frame. And now here's some remotion logic. It's perhaps a little in-depth, so I won't go into too much detail. But the main thing to know in remotion is that there's this hook that you use all the time, and it's called use current frame. So when it's playing this in the remotion player, or when it's rendering out in the cloud pipeline, a lot of the time you're saying, what frame am I currently at? So thinking about that rendering logic that we looked at just before, there's a lot of stuff in here where I'm just like piping data into Arrive. I think I just went past it before. So instead of before where I was setting frame 64 and frame 65, I'm using the use current frame hook to say what current frame should I be displaying. Then I turn that into seconds. And then I also check what was the last frame that the player or the rendering pipeline was currently displaying. And now I'm looking for the delta between those two. So if we remember, this whole slide deck here is just a video that is kind of being rendered on the fly. That means if I pause this, because we can see down in the bottom right corner here that it's currently live and running through frames, 320 frames. If I pause this animation, whoop, now I can see that the animation is paused and not continuing on. And if we jump back out and actually have a look at this as in Studio, we can see that when we move our player head here, we can scrub back and forth. And the best thing about Rive is that it's super performant. So it's displaying these vector graphics really, really fast, and you can jump around the player without any performance limitations. So here we get to, I guess, another side of remotion that is a little bit more technical. Everything we've been talking about so far is kind of building up these remotion compositions, displaying them in the player. But what we need to do is render these out for the user to actually get an MP4. So I touched on it earlier, but these kind of Spotify wrapped campaigns that I build, if you imagine that you had a notification from Spotify that your wrapped campaign is ready, you go into the app, you look at it, you think this is really cool, I want to share this to social media. The ideal UX for that is that they would click share, and straight away they've got their MP4 ready. But when you're displaying that animation on the web page, it's like it's basically free. It's just a web page. It's downloading the remotion and the Rive file, but they're pretty small. But when you render it out to an MP4, that's going to incur some kind of server time. There's been some attempts at the moment to render on device, which I think is coming, but it's currently not available. So it needs to render in the cloud somewhere, and that's where it's going to cost you money. So you want your user to click share and have the MP4 ready straight away. So you might think, well, what I'll do is I'll just render, for all my users, I'll just render their videos now, and then when their videos are completely finished, that's when they get the notification. And then when they click share, the video is ready for them. But it's very, very unlikely that 100% of your users are actually going to want to share that video or even click the notification that they've got a video ready. So let's say that only 20% of your users share it. Well, then you've just wasted like 80% of your rendering costs for no reason. So what we want to do is render that on demand. We don't want to keep our users waiting. So we want it to render out as fast as possible. But we also want it to render out as cheap as possible. Otherwise, businesses aren't going to go for this kind of campaign. So what we can do is use a package called Remotion Lambda. The documentation for this is really, really good on their website. When you deploy this, it's just a single Lambda that gets deployed. And when the user clicks render, that Lambda gets spun up many, many, many times. So you could have like 100 lambdas that spin up, and they all render chunks of the video concurrently. And then when each of those lambdas has finished, you've got all the images ready to be stitched together and then packaged up, and you end up with an MP4 sitting in the S3 bucket. There's also ways to check the progress of the rendering as it's happening. So there's a few different levers we can pull here where we say, do we want our rendering to be as fast as possible, though it will be more expensive, or do we want it to be as cheap as possible, though it will be slower? And depending on our use case, can we keep our users waiting or not? So we can, as I said, we were talking about already the multiple lambdas spinning up at the same time. So we can change the frames per lambda value. So if you've got a video that goes for 300 frames, and then you say that you can have 30 frames per lambda, that means that there's going to be 10 lambdas spun up per user when they click render. But then you've got to think about the quota that you've got in AWS. If you've only got 100 lambdas that are allowed to concurrently run, then you're going to have a user click render, and your quota is exceeded, and then they just get some kind of server issue or whatever you want to say. So one of the things you can do, which is quite easy, is just request a quota increase from AWS so that you can have more people concurrently rendering at the same time. You can also increase the concurrency per lambda. So when the lambda is rendering out this video, what it does is it spins out a headless Chromium browser, and it's generating those frames and taking screenshots. So that's how it's actually creating these frames. But the number of CPU cores that you assign to that lambda, if you've assigned 4 CPU cores to that lambda, that Chromium browser can actually have 4 tabs open at the same time, all taking screenshots as well. So not only do you have concurrency across all your lambdas, you've got concurrency within the lambdas as well. So that can speed things up. But as with most things in engineering, where you just say, it depends, if you max out all your cores, then your rendering might be slower as a result anyway. So you probably want to leave some capacity there. You can also increase the memory size per lambda, which should make rendering faster, but again, it's going to make things more expensive. But probably the most low-hanging fruit is if you've got some rich media in your emotion compositions, things like embedded videos or embedded images. This is a common practice across all web development. You want to keep your assets as small as possible so that when they're getting downloaded to the user, everything's really snappy. But it really matters here because all these lambdas are stateless. So if all 4 of those lambdas require a 25 megabyte image, that needs to be downloaded across all 4. It's not like the first one can download it and then the other lambdas can reuse it. So if you're able to reduce that asset size down to like 500 kilobytes, then you're going to speed up all your lambdas. Okay, so now on to some nice fancy visuals, which I'm sure we're all here for. So if you head to m9wire.com/r6, you don't have to do that right now, but you can see this live on my website. So this is a campaign I made for the video game Rainbow Six. Unfortunately, this was just like a fan campaign, not an official one. But I really wanted to explore the potential for these wrapped campaigns within video games. I think there's a lot of potential there. The way this was working was that you could type in your username and you choose the platform on which you play. It would hit some APIs, gather some data, then it would pipe that data into my own Edge function I had, which was doing a bunch of calculations and then passing that back to the front end, which would then display this in the browser. And it would also kick off a rendering pipeline in the background so that while you're viewing this, by the time you click share, the video is already ready for you to share. And when designing these kind of wrapped campaigns, actually I'll make that a bit bigger. When you're designing these wrapped campaigns, a lot of businesses will think, okay, we've got this user data, and they kind of hit the database and pull back this data, and they don't really think about do users actually, does this tell an interesting story for the user, or is this just like an integer value or a Boolean value from the database? So if you look at something like Strava's wrapped campaign, I think there's a lot more potential that that they could be extracting there, where what you end up with is like you ran, I don't know, 5,000 kilometers this year. Actually, that's kind of interesting, to be honest. But sometimes something like Substack, I know that they have like this wrapped campaign where it says you read 68,000 words, and it's just like I don't even know if that's impressive, or like is that a lot? So yeah, if you are pulling this data in from your database, I think you should be focused on how can I make this user feel proud? How can I show that they're unique among the data, amongst the rest of the users? And how can I tell a story that they're interested in? And then like the top tier, this is the most difficult thing. How can I tell a story that user's friends are interested in, so that they're engaging with it on social media, and there's a chance for these posts to really go viral. And another thing that's cool about this campaign, just now that it's finished, I guess, and when you go on my website, you can just shake your phone and the data will refresh or reset across of it, and it will show just like random values. So it really gives you this feel for like how powerful programmatic video can be.
And then,
so this is another example of programmatic video. It might be outside of what you're thinking about. This is something I built in Rive, and I can pipe in an MP3 file. It will break down the audio across the time, and for a certain sample rate, it's capturing the amplitude across left channel and right channel, and then I split that out to the highs and the lows. So I built this looking at like a real world waveform display. There's a really cool thing with Rive where you can use something called vector feathering, which is a really performant way to cast shadows and make things look realistic. Actually, if you look here, I was looking at this earlier, this is the kind of thing you can do with Rive, where you can look at like the shadows that these lights are creating, and you realize that like this shadow in here is not pure black. It's like green. There's a little bit of pink. Like there's some of this light scattering that's affecting it, and that's the kind of thing you can do in Rive very performantly, is simulate all this light scattering and make things that look super realistic. So yeah, this is from the Shop Talk Show podcast, and yeah, I have my voice at the end of it as well.
And then join us over the Discord, patreon.com.
So you can see this lighting effect around the corner here as well.
You'd like to say?
Oh, not really. Let's go. I'm walking out the door going camping. Goodbye, internet.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.
Enjoy.
Hey, I'm Matt. I'm from Perth, Western Australia, and I build websites. Join me in the Shop Talk Show Discord at patreon.com/Shop Talk Show. Yeah, so, we're talking about programmatic video, but thinking about, what data is actually available and what are some of the fancy things we can do with that data. And I think there's a lot of potential there. This is a campaign that should be launching at the end of September for a weightlifting app called Gravel. So this just summarizes, everything here is customizable from the Gravel team so that they can run this every month. So all those strings are customizable, the user's avatar coming in, the number of times you go into the gym, the amount you lifted each day. All of this data will come in at the end of every month, and they're hoping that this campaign will help to drive new user signups to their app. How am I going for time? Okay, cool. So that is roughly the conclusion of my talk, but I can still talk about this for many days. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, here's my QR code. I really enjoy talking about programmatic video and trying to get as creative as possible with with what can be made. That's my website, m9y.com. The vector rendering animation tool, I guess, Rive, is at rive.app. Remotion, I'm really, really thankful to the team at Remotion. They've, this kind of phase that I'm in with my career is so much thanks goes to them for supporting me. Want to thank DDD Perth, and also, of course, all the sponsors that have made this day possible. Yeah. So if maybe we could jump into some Q&A time, if that's cool. Are you right to walk around with the microphone? Yeah,
yep.
Cool.
So anyone that has questions, I'll bring the mic to you.
The slide deck, I found it to be very interesting. Could you give me a walkthrough of how, behind the scenes, you created it? Like I saw you had interactive code elements in there, as well as frames and everything else. And seeing all of that in like a singular place is kind of new to me. So could you walk me through that if possible?
Yeah, not a problem. Yeah, I mean, this is like with programmatic video, as I was saying, I like to think outside the box. So normally in the Remotion studio, everything on the left here would be a composition. A composition is where you're defining, well, that's the code, I guess. You define the input props, which is the data that's coming in. You define what happens on what frame. And so I pushed a change to the code base, or I opened a pull request, I should say, to have a shortcut key which jumped to the next composition. And that kind of made all of this possible. This is maybe like a little bit hard to wrap your head around. I know that this is not going to be rendered out to an MP4, so I can work within these limitations of this slide. So I know that this slide is always going to loop, as we can see with the playhead. And one of the animations here, which is actually which is tied to the frame number, I should say, is the underscore after data. So when I pause, that's going to pause. But what is not linked to the frame number and is just a CSS animation is the slide kind of indicator, the breadcrumbs at the top. So when I jump to the next slide, the only time that CSS animation is going to play is when that slide appears for the first time. So it's not going to actually loop around. So that's just a CSS animation. So as I go back and forward, that thing always plays the first time, but it's not linked to the frame number. I mean, this here is this is also not linked to a frame number. This is just using the JavaScript runtime, and I'm passing in a Rive file. So that if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure that phone I created with CSS, and then I've just got the Rive file kind of just positioned inside that. Yeah, this one here is code sandbox. So this is just an iframe out to a code sandbox that I've created elsewhere. And I think in the URL, I chose the view where it just shows the code, but on the right side is that preview screen that I can pull across. This one here is, I'm just laying everything out with CSS. This thing on the right is the Remotion like tied to the frame animation that I'm playing, but I've absolutely positioned that on top of the iframe for the code sandbox, and yeah, it looks like I did like a gradient to the background color as well, just to make it look nice. Yeah, is that kind of, yeah. So you can get really, really creative. Obviously, I really like this kind of stuff. Yeah.
My question's kind of related to tooling a little bit as well. So I do game development, and a large part of that, a lot of the premises that you've talked about also apply to game development with shaders and stuff like that. I noticed that, I think it was Rive, had C++ runtimes as well. as well as Unreal and Unity, but I don't use those engines. So have you ever worked with the non-browser versions, with the non-browser version of Rive, sorry? And like how annoying was that, basically, if you did?
Yeah. For the Gravel campaign, I mean, this is probably not what you're asking, but I use the React Native runtime a bit, but you know, that's kind of, from your perspective, it's probably the same thing. So I don't know about using it in the other runtimes, but the data binding, which is like the thing where I pass data in and hook that up to something in the Rive animation, that's fairly new. That came out at some point this year, and I think the documentation will be better in the future. There was a lot of like, a lot of debugging and a lot of just checking like code sandboxes that I happened to find around the place where other people had been debugging, I guess. So I'm not sure if there's something similar. But I also don't know for like Rive's market share, how important it is for them to support the web versus like Unity and game development. I think it's much more a game development tool than a web tool. And they recently just raised money from BMW Ventures, which I think is because one of their use cases is having Rive animations across a dashboard in a car, so you can have like really nice looking things. And that's the thing with Rive, is like it's so performant that you don't need to have like a graphics processor in your car just to be able to display some nice animations on your dashboard. Yep.
We've got time for one more question. Does anyone have any other questions? Amazing.
Cool.
Thank you so much,
you.
Matt.
Appreciate it.